Sarah Martinez had always been different from the other recruits at Camp Pendleton. While her fellow trainees came from military families or had dreams of glory, Sarah carried a secret that weighed heavier than any pack she'd ever shouldered. The small black viper tattoo on her left shoulder blade wasn't just body art, it was a mark of survival, a reminder of the darkest chapter of her life that she'd never spoken about to anyone. The morning sun beat down mercilessly on the training ground as Sergeant Williams barked orders at the exhausted group of Navy SEAL candidates. Sarah wiped sweat from her brow, her dark hair plastered to her forehead despite being pulled back in a tight ponytail. She had been at this for 6 months now, and every single day felt like a test not just of her physical capabilities, but of her mental fortitude.
Martinez. You call that a push-up? Sergeant Williams's voice cut through the air like a blade.
My grandmother could do better than that, and she's been dead for 10 years. The other recruits snickered quietly, but Sarah kept her eyes focused on the ground beneath her. She had learned early in training that reacting to the harassment only made things worse. Instead, she channeled her energy into the exercise, her muscles burning as she completed another perfect push-up. Yes, Sergeant, she replied, her voice steady despite the exhaustion creeping through her body.
But Williams wasn't done.
He never was when it came to Sarah.
You know what, Martinez? I don't think you belong here.
This isn't some Girl Scout camp where we sing songs around a campfire.
This is Navy SEAL training. Real warriors train here.
The word stung, but Sarah had heard worse. Much worse. Growing up in the foster care system in East Los Angeles, she had endured years of abuse, neglect, and being told she would never amount to anything. At 17, she had been living on the streets, surviving by her wits and determination alone. That's when she met Carlos Vega, a man who promised her protection and a family, but delivered only violence and exploitation. Carlos ran one of the most brutal human trafficking rings on the West Coast, and Sarah had been trapped in his web for 2 years.
The black viper tattoo wasn't her choice, it was Carlos's mark of ownership, forcibly tattooed on every girl in his operation.
The viper represented deadly beauty, he had told them, something that could lure victims in before striking with lethal force.
Sarah's escape had been nothing short of miraculous.
During a police raid that went wrong, she had managed to slip away in the chaos. But, instead of running back to the streets, she had walked straight into a military recruitment office. The recruiter, Staff Sergeant Johnson, had seen something in her eyes, a determination that couldn't be taught or trained. He had helped her get her GED, worked with her to meet the basic requirements, and eventually sponsored her entry into the Navy. Now, 2 years later, she was in the most elite training program in the military, surrounded by men who saw her as an outsider, a weakness, a mistake that somehow slipped through the screening process.
I said drop and give me 50 more.
Williams shouted, his face red with what seemed like genuine anger.
And, if you can't keep up, there's the door. No one's forcing you to be here.
Sarah dropped back into position, her arms already trembling from the previous set. Around her, the other recruits had moved on to the next exercise, but Williams kept her isolated, kept pushing her beyond what he demanded from anyone else. She suspected he was trying to break her, to make her quit so he could prove his point about women in special forces. As she struggled through the push-ups, Sarah caught glimpses of the other trainees. There was Marcus Thompson, a former college football player whose father had been a Navy SEAL. He performed every exercise with the confidence of someone who had never doubted his place in the world. Then, there was David Chen, whose brothers had all served in special forces, and who carried himself with the easy camaraderie of someone born into military culture. These men had support systems, families who understood their dreams, and backgrounds that prepared them for this moment.
Sarah had none of that.
She had only her own stubborn refusal to give up, born from years of surviving situations that would have broken most people. 38, 39, 40, she counted under her breath, her form still perfect despite the exhaustion. She had learned to compartmentalize pain, to push through physical discomfort by focusing on something beyond the immediate moment. During her time with Carlos, that survival mechanism had kept her alive. Now, it was keeping her in the program.
Pathetic, Williams muttered, loud enough for the other recruits to hear. You're holding back the entire team, Martinez.
real SEALs don't have time to babysit deadweight. The comment was designed to turn the other recruits against her, and Sarah could feel the shift in the group's energy. Some of them were starting to resent her presence, viewing her as the reason for extended training sessions and harder punishments. She understood their frustration, but she also knew that quitting wasn't an option. This program wasn't just about becoming a Navy SEAL for her, it was about proving to herself that she could transform from victim to protector, that she could use her experiences to help others who couldn't help themselves. The morning drill continued with obstacle courses, rope climbing, and weapons training. Sarah performed adequately in most areas, excelling in some, but Williams found fault with everything she did. When she completed the rope climb in record time, he criticized her technique. When she scored perfectly on the marksmanship test, he questioned whether she had somehow cheated. During the lunch break, Sarah sat alone at a table in the mess hall, picking at her food while the other recruits clustered in groups, sharing jokes and building the bonds that would be crucial in actual combat situations. She could hear fragments of their conversations, discussions about weekend plans, family visits, and shared experiences from their past. She had nothing to contribute to such talks, no normal childhood memories or family traditions to share. "You know, Martinez," came a voice from behind her. Sarah looked up to see Jake Morrison, one of the few recruits who hadn't actively joined in the mockery. He was older than most of the others, maybe 26, and carried himself with a quiet confidence that suggested real-world experience beyond high school sports and college ROTC programs. "Morrison," she acknowledged with a nod, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. He sat down and unwrapped his sandwich, eating in comfortable silence for a few moments before speaking. "Williams is pushing you harder than anyone else." "I noticed," Sarah replied dryly, taking a sip of water. "Question is, why are you letting him?" Sarah looked up sharply. "What's that supposed to mean?" "I mean, you're clearly capable. Your scores are in the top 10% in almost every category, you never complain, never ask for special treatment, never make excuses. But you take his abuse like you think you deserve it." The observation hit closer to home than Sarah was comfortable with. She had spent years accepting abuse because she believed she had no other choice, no other value beyond what others decided she was worth. Breaking that pattern wasn't as simple as joining the military and excelling in training. "Maybe I do deserve it," she said quietly. Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her with intelligent gray eyes. "That's bull, and you know it. Whatever's in your past, whatever brought you here, you earned your place just like the rest of us. Don't let Williams convince you otherwise." Before Sarah could respond, the conversation was interrupted by the sound of chairs scraping against the floor. Marcus Thompson and two of his friends approached their table, their expressions making it clear this wasn't a friendly visit. "Mind if we sit?" Thompson asked, though he was already pulling out a chair without waiting for permission. "Actually, yes," Morrison replied evenly, but Thompson ignored him. "Look, Martinez," Thompson began, his voice carrying the casual cruelty that seemed to come naturally to him. "I don't have anything personal against you, but this whole thing isn't working out. You're making the rest of us look bad, and, honestly, I don't think you're cut out for this." Sarah set down her fork and met his gaze directly. "Is that right?" "It's just facts. Williams is riding all of us harder because of you. The training timeline is getting extended because you can't keep up. And, at the end of the day, do you really want to be responsible when someone dies because their teammate wasn't strong enough to have their back?" The question was designed to prey on exactly the kind of self-doubt that Sarah struggled with, and, for a moment, it worked. She could feel the familiar spiral of negative thoughts beginning, the voice in her head that sounded suspiciously like Carlos telling her she was worthless, that she was fooling herself if she thought she could ever be anything more than a victim. But, then, she remembered something else Carlos used to say, that she was too stubborn to know when to quit. At the time, it had been a criticism, a source of frustration for him when his usual methods of breaking down his victims didn't work on her. Now, she realized it might be her greatest strength. "You're right," she said quietly, and Thompson smiled, thinking he had one. "Someone could die if their teammate isn't strong enough." Thompson's smile widened, but Sarah wasn't finished. "That's exactly why I'm not quitting.
Because I know what it's like to need someone to have your back and have no one show up. I know what it's like to be helpless, to be at the mercy of people who want to hurt you. And I'll be damned if I let that happen to anyone else because I wasn't good enough to help them. The intensity in her voice surprised even Morrison, and Thompson's smile faded quickly. There was something in Sarah's eyes, a kind of steel forged in circumstances none of them could imagine, that made it clear this conversation was over. "We'll see," Thompson muttered as he stood up, his friends following him back to their own table. Morrison watched them go, then turned back to Sarah. "Want to tell me what that was really about?" Sarah shook her head. "Not particularly." "Fair enough. But, for what it's worth, I think Thompson's an idiot. You've got something the rest of us don't, something that can't be taught. Don't let them take that away from you." The afternoon training session focused on underwater survival skills, one of the most challenging aspects of Navy SEAL preparation. The candidates had to complete a series of tasks while holding their breath underwater, simulating the kind of scenarios they might face in actual operations. Sarah had always been a strong swimmer, a skill she had picked up during brief periods in foster homes with access to public pools, but the psychological pressure of the underwater exercises triggered memories she had worked hard to suppress. Being unable to breathe, feeling trapped and helpless, reminded her too much of other situations where her survival had depended on her ability to endure. Williams, as usual, seemed to sense her discomfort and decided to exploit it. "Martinez, you're moving like you're underwater in slow motion. In a real operation, that hesitation gets your teammates killed." Sarah surfaced, gasping and disoriented, while the other recruits completed their tasks efficiently around her. The chlorinated water stung her eyes, but not as much as the realization that Williams might be right. Maybe her past experiences, the very things that made her determined to succeed, were also the things that would prevent her from being effective in the field. That evening, Sarah lay in her narrow bunk, staring at the ceiling and listening to the quiet conversations of her fellow recruits. Tomorrow would bring another day of training, another opportunity for Williams to find fault with her performance, another test of her resolve to stay in the program. She thought about Morrison's words, about the distinction between deserving abuse and simply enduring it. For the first time since joining the Navy, she began to wonder if there was a difference between being strong enough to survive and being strong enough to thrive. The black viper on her shoulder seemed to burn in the darkness, a reminder of everything she had escaped and everything she was fighting to become. Outside, the Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly under a canopy of stars, indifferent to the struggles of the young woman trying to transform herself from victim to warrior. Sarah closed her eyes and tried to imagine a future where she wore the Navy SEAL trident with pride, where her past became a source of strength rather than shame. But, first, she had to make it through tomorrow's training. And the day after that. And every day until she either earned her place among the elite or was forced to admit that some transformations were too ambitious to achieve. The Black Viper tattoo would either become a symbol of her victory over her past or a permanent reminder of her failure to escape it. Only time would tell which story would ultimately be true. 3 weeks after the confrontation in the mess hall, the training had intensified to a level that pushed every recruit to their absolute limits. Sarah had managed to hold her ground, neither excelling dramatically nor falling behind catastrophically, but the constant pressure from Sergeant Williams was taking its toll. She had lost weight she couldn't afford to lose, and dark circles under her eyes spoke to nights spent lying awake, replaying every mistake and criticism from the day. The morning began with a 5-mile run in full gear, followed by an extended session in the mud pit that left every recruit coated in thick, dark sludge that seemed to seep into their very bones. Sarah's lungs burned as she hauled herself through the obstacle course, her gear weighing what felt like twice its actual weight in the humid morning air. "Martinez, you're dragging again." Williams's voice cut through the sound of her labored breathing. "In the field, the enemy doesn't wait for you to catch your breath." Sarah gritted her teeth and pushed harder, her legs screaming in protest as she forced herself through the final obstacle. She had been getting stronger over the weeks, her body adapting to the relentless physical demands, but Williams never acknowledged any improvement. If anything, he seemed to find new ways to highlight her supposed inadequacies. What made it worse was that some of the other recruits were starting to treat her like a liability.
During team exercises, she could see the frustration in their eyes when Williams singled her out, extending their training sessions or adding extra punishments because of her perceived failures. Marcus Thompson had organized an informal coalition of recruits who made it clear they viewed her as deadweight, and their resentment was becoming harder to ignore. The breaking point came during a simulated hostage rescue exercise. The recruits were divided into teams and given a scenario where they had to infiltrate a building, neutralize threats, and extract civilians without casualties. Sarah was assigned to Thompson's team, along with David Chen and 2 other recruits who had made their feelings about her known. The exercise was meant to test their ability to work together under pressure, to communicate effectively and trust their teammates in high-stress situations. For Sarah, it became a demonstration of just how isolated she had become within the program. "Okay, listen up," Thompson said as they reviewed the building plans.
"Chen, you take point.
Rodriguez, you're our eyes from the roof.
Martinez."
He paused, looking at her with barely concealed disdain. "You watch our 6 and try not to screw anything up." The assignment was clearly meant to minimize her involvement in the actual operation, relegating her to the least critical position where her mistakes would be less likely to compromise the mission.
Sarah understood the logic, but it stung nonetheless.
In every other team exercise, recruits were rotated through different positions to develop a full range of skills. Being consistently given the least important role was another form of isolation. "Roger that," she replied, her voice steady despite her frustration. The exercise began with the team moving through the building systematically, clearing rooms and advancing toward their objective. Sarah maintained her position at the rear, watching for threats while the others executed the plan Thompson had developed. Everything seemed to be going according to schedule until they reached the 3rd floor, where the scenario called for a more complex situation. According to their intelligence briefing, the floor contained both hostiles and civilians, requiring careful identification before engagement. Thompson's team had trained for this kind of scenario, but the execution required perfect coordination and split-second decision-making.
"Movement in room 307, Chen whispered into his radio. "Can't confirm hostile or civilian."
"Hold position," Thompson replied.
"Rodriguez, what do you see from your angle?"
"Negative.
Windows are blocked from here."
Sarah, watching from the stairwell, had a clear view into the room through a partially open door. She could see the figure Chen had spotted, a role player dressed as a civilian but holding what appeared to be a weapon behind their back.
The scenario was designed to test their ability to identify threats that weren't immediately obvious.
"Thompson, I've got eyes on the target," she whispered into her radio.
"Civilian appearance but armed. Weapon concealed behind their back."
There was a pause before Thompson responded.
"Negative, Martinez. Maintain your position." "Thompson, I'm telling you, the subject is armed."
"If Chen goes in without knowing, I said maintain your position," Thompson cut her off, his voice sharp with command authority. Sarah watched in growing alarm as Chen prepared to enter the room, following Thompson's orders to approach the figure as a civilian rescue rather than a potential threat. The training exercise used simulation rounds and safety protocols, but the scenarios were designed to be as realistic as possible. Chen's approach would result in a simulated casualty, either his own death or the death of a civilian, depending on how the role player was instructed to respond. In that moment, Sarah faced a choice that would define not just her future in the program, but her understanding of what it meant to be part of a team. She could follow Thompson's orders and watch Chen walk into a trap, or she could act on her own judgment and risk insubordination charges. The decision was made in less than a second. Sarah moved from her position, crossing the hallway at an angle that gave her a clear shot at the armed figure while staying out of Chen's line of fire. When the role player raised their weapon toward Chen, Sarah was ready.
"Contact."
"Armed civilian, 3 o'clock, she called out as she fired her simulation rounds, neutralizing the threat before it could engage Chen.
The exercise stopped immediately. Instructors emerged from hidden positions, and the role players dropped their characters.
Chen looked shaken as he realized how close he had come to walking into an ambush, but Thompson's face was dark with anger.
"What the hell was that, Martinez?" he demanded. "I gave you a direct order to maintain your position."
You gave me an order that would have gotten Chen killed, Sarah replied, her adrenaline still high from the encounter. I had clear intel that the subject was armed, and you chose to ignore it. That's not your call to make. In a real operation, breaking position without authorization could compromise the entire mission. You could get everyone killed. Sarah felt the familiar surge of anger that she had learned to suppress during her time with Carlos, the rage that came from being blamed for someone else's mistakes. But, this time, she didn't swallow it. This time, she had been right, and she knew it. In a real operation, ignoring good intelligence gets people killed, she shot back. Chen would be dead right now if I had followed your orders. The confrontation was interrupted by the arrival of Sergeant Williams, who had been observing the exercise from the command center. His expression was unreadable as he looked between Thompson and Sarah, taking in the tension that had erupted between the teammates. Debrief, now, he said simply, gesturing toward the exit. The post-exercise analysis was brutal. Thompson argued that Sarah had shown a fundamental inability to follow orders, that her insubordination made her unsuitable for special operations where unit cohesion was critical. Sarah defended her decision, pointing out that she had prevented a simulated casualty by acting on intelligence that Thompson had chosen to ignore. Williams listened to both sides without comment, his face revealing nothing about his assessment of the situation. When both recruits had finished their presentations, he turned to the other members of the team. Chen, what's your perspective? David Chen looked uncomfortable being put in the middle of the dispute, but his answer was honest. Sir, Martinez saved my life in there. I was about to walk into an ambush because I trusted Thompson's assessment of the threat level. Without her intervention, I would have been taken out. Rodriguez? The recruit who had been positioned on the roof nodded reluctantly. Martinez had the best angle on the target, sir. Her intelligence was accurate. Williams nodded slowly, then dismissed the other team members, leaving only Thompson and Sarah in the debriefing room. The silence stretched uncomfortably as he reviewed the footage from the exercise, watching the key moments from multiple angles. Finally, he spoke. Thompson, your assessment of Martinez's performance? Sir, she's a liability. She can't follow orders, she's divisive within the team structure, and she's not mentally prepared for the kind of operations we'll be conducting. I request that she be removed from the program. Williams turned to Sarah. Your response? Sarah took a deep breath, knowing that her next words could determine whether she stayed in the program or was sent home. Sir, I followed my training and my judgment to prevent a friendly casualty. I understand the importance of unit cohesion, but I also understand that sometimes leadership makes mistakes. In this case, Thompson's decision to ignore actionable intelligence would have resulted in Chen's death. I'm not willing to watch a teammate die to prove that I can follow bad orders. The room fell silent again. Williams stared at both recruits for what felt like an eternity before speaking. Thompson, you're suspended from team leader duties pending review. Your assessment of the tactical situation was flawed, and your response to corrective intelligence showed poor judgment. Martinez, you're right about the intelligence, but your execution was problematic. In the field, there are ways to challenge leadership decisions without going rogue. Neither recruit looked entirely satisfied with the assessment, but Williams wasn't finished. However, both of you need to understand something. This program isn't just about following orders or even about making the right tactical decisions. It's about being the kind of person who can be trusted in the most extreme situations imaginable. Thompson, your willingness to sacrifice a teammate to maintain your authority shows you're not there yet. Martinez, your willingness to act alone shows you don't fully trust your teammates. Sarah felt the criticism hit home. Williams was right, her decision to act independently hadn't just been about saving Chen. It had also been about her inability to trust that anyone else would make the right decision when it mattered. Years of relying only on herself for survival had made it almost impossible for her to truly depend on others. You're both remaining in the program for now, Williams continued, but this team is done. Martinez, you'll be reassigned. Thompson, you'll get another chance at leadership, but not with recruits who have reason to question your judgment. That evening, Sarah sat alone on the beach near the base, watching the waves crash against the shore while she processed the day's events. She had won the immediate battle, her assessment of the threat had been correct, and she had prevented what would have been a training failure for Chen. But she had also revealed something about herself that she wasn't proud of, her inability to truly function as part of a team. The black viper tattoo seemed to throb under her t-shirt, a reminder of why trusting others was so difficult for her. In Carlos's world, the only person you could depend on was yourself, and anyone who claimed to have your back was probably positioning themselves to stab you in it. Those lessons were hard to unlearn, even in an environment where teamwork was supposed to be the foundation of everything. Jake Morrison found her there an hour later, settling onto the sand beside her without invitation. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes before he spoke.
"Heard about what happened today?" "I bet you did," Sarah replied. "Probably the whole base heard about it by now."
"Thompson's an ass," Morrison said bluntly.
"But he's not wrong about everything."
Sarah looked at him sharply.
"Meaning?"
"Meaning you saved Chen's life today, and that took guts. But you also threw away any chance of working with that team again."
"Sometimes the smart play is finding a way to be right without making enemies."
Sarah considered this, knowing Morrison was correct but not sure how to change her approach.
"I don't know how to do that," she admitted.
"I don't know how to trust people to make the right choice when lives are on the line." Morrison was quiet for a moment, watching the waves.
"What happened to you?" he asked finally. "And don't tell me it's nothing."
"Nobody gets to where you are, with your skills and your determination, without surviving something that would break most people." Sarah had never told anyone in the military about her past, had never shared the details of her time with Carlos or the circumstances that led to her escape. But, sitting there in the darkness, with the sound of the ocean washing away the day's tensions, she found herself wanting to tell someone the truth. "I was trafficked," she said quietly. "For 2 years, from 17 to 19. The man who controlled me, he had this philosophy about trust. He said trust was just another word for weakness, that the only person who would ever really protect you was yourself." Morrison didn't react with shock or pity, just nodded slightly as if her words had confirmed something he had suspected.
"That why you joined up?"
"Part of it. I wanted to prove I could be someone who protects others instead of someone who needs protection. But I guess some lessons are harder to unlearn than others."
"Maybe," Morrison agreed.
"Or maybe you just need to find the right people to trust. Thompson's not worth your faith, but Chen is. You proved that today when you risked your career to keep him safe." Sarah considered this, realizing that Morrison had identified something important about her decision to act independently. It hadn't just been about distrust, it had also been about protecting someone she had come to care about, even if she couldn't admit that to herself at the time.
"Williams is reassigning me," she said.
"New team, fresh start.
Good.
Maybe this time you'll find teammates worth trusting." As they sat there, Sarah felt something shift inside her, a small crack in the wall she had built around herself. Morrison's acceptance of her story, his lack of judgment about her past, made her think that maybe vulnerability wasn't always the same thing as weakness. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, washing away the day's mistakes and failures, preparing the beach for whatever tomorrow might bring. Sarah knew that her next team assignment would be crucial, that her ability to stay in the program might depend on her capacity to find the balance between independence and trust that had eluded her so far. But, for the first time since joining the Navy, she felt like maybe, with the right people, that balance was possible to achieve.
Sarah's new team assignment came with both relief and apprehension.
She had been placed with 4 recruits she had barely interacted with during the previous months of training: Jake Morrison, whom she trusted, Elena Vesquez, a former Marine who had transferred to Navy SEAL training, Omar Hassan, a Navy corpsman with extensive field medical experience, and Michael Santos, a quiet but highly skilled recruit whose background remained largely mysterious to the others. The team dynamics were immediately different from her experience with Thompson's group. There was no obvious leader trying to assert dominance, no clear hierarchy based on family military history or athletic achievements. Instead, the 5 recruits seemed to approach each other with cautious respect, each bringing different strengths and experiences to the collective effort.
Sergeant Williams addressed their first team meeting with his characteristic bluntness. You 5 are what's left after the initial cuts and reassignments. Some of you are here because you showed potential that needs development. Others are here because you need to prove you can function as part of a unit. All of you are here because you haven't quit yet, which is more than I can say for the 30% of recruits who've already washed out. Sarah glanced around at her new teammates, noting the subtle tension that always accompanied Williams's speeches. The sergeant had a talent for making even neutral statements sound like threats or challenges. Your next phase of training will focus on extended operations under extreme stress conditions. You'll be spending the next 2 weeks in a simulated hostile environment with limited supplies, sleep deprivation, and constant pressure from opposing forces. The failure rate for this exercise is typically around 40%. Elena Vasquez raised her hand slightly. What constitutes failure, Sergeant? Individual failure means you quit, you get injured, or you compromise the mission through incompetence. Team failure means the entire unit gets eliminated because one person's weakness puts everyone at risk. Either way, you're out of the program. Williams paused, letting the implications sink in before continuing. This isn't just about physical endurance anymore. It's about psychological resilience, tactical thinking, and the ability to maintain unit cohesion when everything is falling apart around you. The scenarios you'll face are designed to push you beyond your comfort zones and reveal who you really are under pressure. After Williams dismissed them, the team gathered in an empty classroom to discuss their approach to the upcoming exercise. Sarah remained mostly quiet during the initial conversation, still wary of asserting herself too strongly after the conflicts with her previous team. Morrison took the lead in organizing their discussion, but in a way that invited input from everyone rather than dictating strategy. Okay, so we know this is going to test us in ways the individual training hasn't. What are our respective strengths, and where do we think we might struggle? Omar Hassan spoke first. Medical training is my strongest area, obviously. I've also got experience with fieldcraft and survival techniques from my corpsman training. My weakness is probably pure physical strength compared to the rest of you. Elena nodded. Marine combat experience gives me tactical knowledge and leadership experience. I'm comfortable making decisions under fire. But I sometimes have trouble adjusting to Navy protocols since they're different from what I'm used to. Santos, who rarely spoke during group discussions, surprised them with his candor. Technical skills are my strength, communications, electronics, demolitions. I can handle most equipment-related challenges. Social dynamics are harder for me. I don't always read interpersonal situations correctly. Morrison gestured toward Sarah. What about you? Sarah hesitated, unsure how much to reveal about her background and the skills it had given her. I'm good at surviving difficult situations and thinking on my feet when plans go wrong. I notice things that others might miss. But I sometimes have trouble trusting other people's judgment, which can create problems in team situations. The honesty in her response seemed to shift something in the group dynamic. By acknowledging her weakness openly, she had created space for the others to be equally honest about their own limitations. Morrison nodded. Fair enough. My background is in intelligence analysis, so I'm good at processing information quickly and identifying patterns. Combat experience is more limited than Elena's, but I'm comfortable with tactical planning. My weakness is probably that I overthink situations sometimes when quick decisions are needed. Elena leaned forward. So we've got medical skills, tactical experience, technical expertise, survival instincts, and analytical thinking. That's actually a pretty well-rounded team if we can figure out how to coordinate effectively. The conversation that followed was unlike any Sarah had experienced during her time in the program. Instead of jockeying for position or trying to establish dominance, the team members genuinely seemed focused on understanding how to function as a unit. They discussed communication protocols, decision-making processes, and contingency planning with a level of maturity that impressed Sarah. Omar raised an important question toward the end of their session. How do we handle leadership? The instructors will be watching to see how we organize ourselves, but they haven't designated a team leader. Situational leadership, Elena suggested.
Whoever has the most relevant experience or expertise takes point for that particular challenge. If we're dealing with medical issues, Omar leads. Technical problems, Santos takes charge. Combat situations, I might be best qualified. Analytical challenges, Morrison's your guy. And if things get really bad and we need someone who's good at adapting to chaos. She looked at Sarah. That might be when we need Sarah making the calls. Sarah felt a flutter of something she hadn't experienced in months, genuine appreciation for being valued by teammates who understood her capabilities. The acknowledgement that her survival skills and adaptability might be assets rather than character flaws was both validating and intimidating. The 2-week exercise began 3 days later with the team being dropped in a remote section of desert terrain with minimal equipment and instructions to reach a series of objectives while evading capture by opposing forces. The scenario was designed to simulate an extended infiltration mission in hostile territory, complete with sleep deprivation, inadequate nutrition, and constant threat of discovery. The first 48 hours went relatively smoothly. The team moved carefully through their assigned route, avoiding detection by the instructors playing opposing forces and reaching their initial objectives on schedule. Sarah found herself naturally falling into the role of scout and early warning system, using skills developed during her time on the streets to detect potential threats and safe routes. On the third night, everything began to unravel. Omar developed symptoms of heat exhaustion that quickly progressed to heatstroke, leaving him barely conscious and unable to continue. The team faced their first major decision: abandon the mission to evacuate Omar, try to complete the objectives while carrying an incapacitated teammate, or leave him behind with minimal care while the rest of the team continued. Elena, taking leadership for the medical emergency, was clear about Omar's condition. He needs immediate cooling and, for fluids, or this could become life-threatening. Even with treatment, he's not going to be functional for at least 12 hours. Santos reviewed their technical objectives. We've got 3 more checkpoints to hit, and 2 of them require communications equipment setup that Omar was supposed to handle. I can manage the technical aspects, but it'll take longer without his help. Morrison analyzed their tactical situation. The opposing forces have been closing in on our position. If we stay here to treat Omar, we'll probably be captured within the next few hours. If we move with him, we'll be too slow to avoid detection. Sarah listened to the discussion, recognizing that this was exactly the kind of scenario Williams had warned them about, where one person's limitation could compromise the entire team. But she also recognized it as a test of their values and priorities, not just their tactical skills. What would happen in a real operation? She asked quietly. Elena's answer was immediate. In a real operation, we'd call for evacuation and abort the mission. No objective is worth losing a teammate. But this isn't a real operation, Morrison pointed out. It's a test. They're watching to see how we handle impossible choices. Sarah looked at Omar, who was drifting in and out of consciousness despite Elena's treatment efforts. She thought about Carlos's philosophy that people were expendable, that survival meant making the hard choices that others couldn't make. Then, she thought about Chen, and her decision to risk her position to protect him during the hostage exercise. We're not leaving him, she said firmly. And, we're not abandoning the mission either. Elena looked skeptical. Sarah, there's no way to do both. We don't have the resources to treat him properly while maintaining operational security. Maybe we don't have to choose. Sarah pulled out the map and studied their position relative to the remaining objectives. What if we split the team? 2 people stay with Omar, find a defensible position, and focus on keeping him alive and hidden. The other 3 continue the mission and rendezvous with the medical team after completing the objectives. Morrison frowned. That violates the basic principle of staying together as a unit. If either group gets into trouble, they won't have backup. It also divides our capabilities, Santos added. Medical knowledge, technical skills, tactical experience, we'd be spreading ourselves too thin. Sarah understood their concerns, but she also saw something in the scenario that the others might be missing. This isn't just about completing the objectives. It's about proving we can function under impossible circumstances while maintaining our values.
Williams isn't just testing our tactical skills, he's testing who we are.
Elena considered this, her expression thoughtful.
You might be right. But, if we're going to split up, we need to be smart about it. Medical team should include me since I have the most combat experience to provide security. Sarah should go with the mission team since her infiltration skills will be crucial for the remaining objectives.
No, Sarah said, surprising everyone including herself.
Omar stays with Morrison and Santos. Morrison's analytical skills will help them avoid detection, and Santos can handle any technical issues that come up with Omar's equipment. Elena and I take the mission objectives.
The proposal made tactical sense, but it also represented something more significant for Sarah, a conscious choice to trust her teammates with critical responsibilities while taking on a leadership role that put her in the position of greatest risk.
Elena nodded slowly. It could work. Morrison and Santos find a secure location, keep Omar alive and hidden until we can return. Sarah and I move fast and light to hit the remaining objectives. Timeline? Morrison asked.
18 hours maximum, Sarah replied. If we're not back by then, assume we've been captured and focus on getting Omar out safely. The plan was risky, but it represented exactly the kind of adaptive thinking that Navy SEAL operations required. More importantly for Sarah, it demonstrated that she could function as part of a team while still trusting her own judgment about tactical decisions. The separation was emotionally difficult for all of them. They had only been working together for a few days, but the shared stress of the exercise had created bonds that none of them had anticipated. Sarah found herself genuinely worried about Omar's condition and Morrison's ability to keep the medical team safe while she focused on the mission objectives.
Elena proved to be an excellent partner for the infiltration phase of their operation.
Her Marine training complemented Sarah's street-smart survival instincts, and they moved through the hostile territory with an efficiency that surprised both of them. The first objective, establishing a communications relay, went smoothly, with Elena providing security while Sarah handled the technical setup Santos had taught her.
The second objective proved more challenging.
They had to retrieve intelligence from a simulated enemy facility while avoiding capture by opposing forces who had apparently increased their patrol frequency.
The approach required them to move through an area with minimal cover during daylight hours, relying on timing and stealth to avoid detection. Guards changed shifts in 8 minutes, Elena whispered as they observed the target building from concealment. That gives us a 90-second window when the perimeter is understaffed. Sarah studied the building layout, identifying potential entry points and escape routes. Back entrance is our best bet.
Single guard, limited visibility from other positions.
But we'll need a distraction to draw attention away from that side of the building.
I can create noise on the far side, Elena offered.
Give you cover to get inside and retrieve the intelligence. What about extraction?
If you're drawing attention, you won't be in position to provide covering fire when I come out. Elena's smile was grim but confident.
Trust me to handle my end, and I'll trust you to handle yours.
The statement was simple, but it represented exactly the kind of mutual dependence that Sarah had been struggling with throughout her training. Elena was asking her to act independently while also relying on someone else's skills for her own safety.
The operation went flawlessly. Elena's distraction drew the guards to the far side of the building just as Sarah reached the back entrance.
She retrieved the intelligence package and escaped without detection, meeting Elena at their predetermined rendezvous point exactly on schedule. As they moved toward their final objective, Sarah realized that something fundamental had shifted in her approach to teamwork. She was still relying on her own skills and judgment, but she was also genuinely trusting Elena to fulfill her responsibilities. The combination felt both natural and revolutionary. The final objective was the most challenging. They had to disable a simulated enemy communications array without alerting the facility's security force. The target was heavily guarded and required both technical expertise and tactical precision to approach safely.
Santos would be better at the technical aspects, Elena observed as they conducted reconnaissance.
But we'll have to improvise with what we know. Sarah studied the communications equipment, recognizing some components from her training but uncertain about the most effective way to disable the system.
I can probably cause enough damage to complete the objective, but it'll be obvious and noisy. They'll know we were here within minutes. Sometimes obvious is okay, Elena replied. As long as we complete the mission and get out safely. The approach required them to eliminate 2 guards silently before Sarah could access the communications array. Elena's combat experience proved invaluable as they moved into position, and the takedown went smoothly. Sarah disabled the equipment quickly but thoroughly, ensuring that the objective was completed beyond any doubt. As they extracted from the target area, Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond simply completing the assigned tasks. She had functioned effectively as part of a team while maintaining her independence and initiative. More importantly, she had trusted Elena completely and been proven right to do so. The rendezvous with Morrison, Santos, and Omar 18 hours later was emotional for all of them. Omar had recovered sufficiently to travel, though he was still weak from his heat illness. Morrison and Santos had successfully kept the medical team hidden and secure while providing the support Omar needed to recover. Mission status? Morrison asked as the team reunited. All objectives completed, Elena reported. Intelligence retrieved, communications disrupted, team intact. Sarah looked around at her teammates, realizing that they had achieved something that went beyond the specific requirements of the exercise. They had faced an impossible situation and found a way to maintain both their operational effectiveness and their loyalty to each other. When Sergeant Williams debriefed them after the exercise, his assessment was characteristically blunt but surprisingly positive. You took significant risks with the split-team approach, and, under normal circumstances, I would have failed you for violating unit cohesion protocols. However, your decision-making process was sound, your execution was flawless, and you achieved all objectives while maintaining 0 casualties. More importantly, you demonstrated the kind of adaptive thinking and mutual trust that defines effective special operations teams. Sarah felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with personal achievement and everything to do with being part of something larger than herself. For the first time since joining the Navy, she truly understood what it meant to be part of a team that was stronger than the sum of its individual parts. The final phase of Navy SEAL training arrived with the weight of months of preparation and the knowledge that fewer than half of the original candidates remained in the program. Sarah's team had distinguished itself during the extended survival exercise, earning respect from instructors and fellow recruits alike. But the ultimate test still lay ahead, a comprehensive evaluation that would determine who earned the right to wear the Navy SEAL Trident and who would be reassigned to other naval duties. Colonel James Mitchell arrived at Camp Pendleton on a Tuesday morning in late September, his presence immediately commanding attention from everyone on the base. At 52, Mitchell was a legend in the special operations community, with a career that spanned 3 decades and included some of the military's most classified and successful missions. His reputation preceded him, a man who demanded excellence, recognized genuine merit, and had 0 tolerance for anything that compromised mission effectiveness. Sarah first saw him during a morning formation, noting the way even the instructors straightened their posture when he appeared. Mitchell was of average height but carried himself with the confident bearing of someone accustomed to making life-and-death decisions. His gray eyes seemed to take in every detail of the assembled recruits, and Sarah felt a momentary flutter of nervousness under his scrutiny. Sergeant Williams introduced Mitchell to the remaining candidates with unusual formality. Colonel Mitchell is here to conduct final evaluations for Navy SEAL qualification. He has direct authority over advancement decisions, and his assessment will determine your future in special operations. The next 72 hours will consist of individual and team evaluations designed to test everything you've learned during this program. Mitchell stepped forward, his voice carrying the authority of decades of combat experience. Ladies and gentlemen, you've made it further than most people ever will in this program. That's an achievement in itself, regardless of what happens over the next few days. But I'm not here to congratulate you on your progress, I'm here to determine whether you're ready to join the most elite fighting force in the world. His gaze swept across the assembled recruits, lingering momentarily on Sarah before continuing. Navy SEALs operate in environments where failure means death for you, for your teammates, and for the innocent people you're sworn to protect. My job is to ensure that only people capable of that responsibility receive this qualification. The first day of evaluation focused on individual skills testing. Each recruit was assessed on marksmanship, underwater operations, close quarters combat, and technical proficiency.
Sarah performed well in most areas, her scores consistently in the top tier of remaining candidates. But she noticed Mitchell observing her more closely than some of the others, taking notes that he didn't seem to be recording for every recruit. During the underwater assessment, Sarah faced her greatest challenge. The test required her to remain submerged for an extended period while completing complex tasks, simulating the kind of underwater operations that Navy SEALs regularly conducted. The confined underwater environment triggered memories of feeling trapped and helpless, sensations that she had worked hard to overcome but couldn't completely suppress. Halfway through the assessment, Sarah felt the familiar panic beginning to build. Her breathing became irregular, her movements less precise, and she found herself fighting against the urge to surface immediately. The rational part of her mind knew she was in no real danger, but her body was responding to older memories of being powerless and afraid. Colonel Mitchell was observing from poolside, his expression unreadable as he watched Sarah struggle through the underwater sequence. She managed to complete the required tasks, but her performance was noticeably affected by the psychological challenge of the environment. When she surfaced, gasping and disoriented, Mitchell was waiting with a towel and a question.
"Rough one?"
Sarah considered deflecting or minimizing what had happened, but something in Mitchell's demeanor suggested that honesty would be more valuable than false confidence.
"Yes, sir. Enclosed underwater environments are challenging for me." "Because?"
The question was simple, but Sarah understood that her answer could determine whether she advanced to the final stage of evaluation. She had never told any instructor about her past, had maintained the fiction that her motivation was purely patriotic and her background unremarkable. "I was held captive for 2 years before joining the Navy, sir." Sometimes confined spaces trigger memories that interfere with performance. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but Sarah noticed him glance at the small portion of her tattoo that was visible above her swimsuit line. It was barely noticeable, but his eyes had definitely registered the black ink on her shoulder blade.
"How do you handle those situations in the field?"
"I focus on the mission and push through, sir."
"The panic response doesn't last long if I maintain task focus."
"And your teammates?
How do they respond when you're struggling?"
The question surprised Sarah because it suggested that Mitchell had been observing not just her individual performance, but her interactions with her team. "They provide support when needed and trust me to handle my responsibilities, sir."
Mitchell nodded slowly. "Good answer. Get dried off and report to the next station."
The team evaluation phase began that evening with a complex scenario that required Sarah's team to infiltrate a simulated enemy compound, gather intelligence, and extract without detection. The exercise was designed to test their ability to function as a coordinated unit under pressure, and Colonel Mitchell observed their every move from a command center equipped with multiple camera angles. The mission went smoothly until the extraction phase, when opposing forces detected their presence and began pursuing them toward the pickup point. Elena took point as team leader for the combat scenario, directing their movement while Sarah provided reconnaissance and early warning about enemy positions.
"Contact, 2 o'clock, approximately 50 meters, Sarah whispered into her radio as she spotted the pursuing force. "Copy. Can we avoid?"
Sarah studied the terrain and enemy movement patterns, recognizing an opportunity that would require split-second timing. "Negative on avoidance, but I can create a diversion that gives us a clear path to extraction."
"What kind of diversion?"
"I draw their attention while you move the team to the pickup point.
30-second window, but it should be enough." Elena's response was immediate.
"Negative, Sarah.
We extract as a team."
"Elena, this gives us the best chance of mission success with 0 casualties."
"Trust me."
There was a brief pause before Elena replied.
"Do it. But you better make that extraction point, or I'm coming back for you." Sarah's diversion worked perfectly.
She created enough noise and apparent threat signatures to draw the pursuing forces away from her teammates' route while positioning herself to reach the extraction point through an alternate path. The team successfully completed the mission with textbook execution and perfect coordination. During the debrief, Colonel Mitchell focused on their decision-making process during the crisis moment. Martinez, explain your assessment of the tactical situation that led to your diversion strategy. Sarah walked through her analysis of terrain, enemy positioning, and timing factors that had made the diversion both necessary and feasible.
Mitchell listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. Vasquez, your thoughts on Martinez's proposal? Elena's response was honest and immediate.
Initially, I didn't like it because it separated the team and put Sarah at increased risk. But her assessment was correct, and her execution was flawless. The mission succeeded because she was willing to take calculated risks for team benefit.
Mitchell turned to the other team members. Morrison, Hassan, Santos, any concerns about Martinez's tactical judgment or reliability as a teammate?
All three responses were variations of the same theme. Sarah had proven herself to be both tactically sound and completely trustworthy. Omar specifically mentioned her role in ensuring his safety during the survival exercise, while Santos praised her technical adaptability under pressure.
That evening, Sarah was summoned to a private meeting with Colonel Mitchell in his temporary office.
She entered with some trepidation, uncertain whether the interview was routine or indicated some specific concern about her performance. Mitchell gestured for her to sit, then spent several moments reviewing her file before speaking.
Interesting background, Martinez. No family military history, enlisted at 19 after obtaining a GED, recruited through a non-traditional pathway.
Most of our successful candidates come from military families or college ROTC programs.
Yes, sir. I understand my background is unusual. Unusual isn't necessarily problematic.
But I need to understand what drives you, what makes you think you belong among Navy SEALs. Sarah had prepared for this question throughout her training, but, sitting across from Mitchell, she realized that her rehearsed answers would be inadequate. This man had seen too much and commanded too many missions to be satisfied with patriotic platitudes or generic statements about serving her country.
I know what it's like to be helpless, sir.
I know what it's like to need someone to come for you and have no one show up. I joined the Navy SEALs because I never want anyone to feel that kind of abandonment when they need protection the most. Mitchell leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating gray eyes.
Tell me about the tattoo. Sarah's breath caught.
She had been careful to keep the black viper tattoo covered during training, but Mitchell had apparently noticed it during the swimming assessment. The tattoo was distinctive enough that anyone familiar with human trafficking operations would recognize its significance.
Sir, Ike Martinez, I've been conducting special operations for 30 years.
I've seen that particular tattoo before, and I know what it represents. My question isn't about what happened to you, it's about whether you've dealt with it effectively enough to function in high-stress operations. The directness of his approach was both terrifying and liberating. Sarah had never spoken openly about her past with anyone in the military, but Mitchell's knowledge of the situation meant that deception was no longer an option. I was trafficked for 2 years by Carlos Vega's organization in Los Angeles. The tattoo was forcibly applied as a mark of ownership. I escaped during a federal raid and enlisted 6 months later.
Mitchell nodded. Vega's operation was taken down by a joint task force that included Navy SEAL advisors. Brutal organization, one of the worst we encountered. How did you survive intact enough to make it this far?
I learned that survival meant staying focused on what I could control rather than what was being done to me.
That skill has been useful throughout training. And the psychological impact? Trauma doesn't just disappear because you've enlisted in the military.
Sarah appreciated his directness, understanding that this conversation would determine whether her past was viewed as a liability or a source of strength.
I have triggers, sir.
Confined spaces, situations where I feel powerless.
But I've learned to manage them without compromising mission effectiveness. My teammates can depend on me.
Mitchell was quiet for a long moment, his expression thoughtful.
You know, Martinez, in 30 years of special operations, I've learned that the most reliable people are often those who faced the worst situations and survived them.
People who've never been tested don't always perform when it matters most. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the training grounds where recruits were still conducting evening exercises. Your tactical skills are excellent, your physical conditioning is well above standard, and your psychological resilience is remarkable. But what impressed me most during this evaluation was watching how your teammates respond to you.
Sarah waited, unsure where the conversation was heading.
They trust you completely. Vasquez was willing to authorize a high-risk diversion because she knew you would execute it properly.
Hassan credits you with saving his life during the survival exercise.
Morrison and Santos speak about you the way SEALs talk about proven operators.
That kind of trust can't be taught or faked.
Mitchell turned back to face her.
There's one more thing I want to discuss. Your tattoo, have you considered having it removed or modified?
The question surprised Sarah. She had thought about tattoo removal many times, but something had always stopped her from following through. I've considered it, sir, but I haven't decided to remove it.
Why not?
Sarah struggled to articulate feelings she had never fully examined.
I think maybe because removing it would feel like pretending it never happened.
The experiences that gave me this tattoo also gave me the strength to make it through this program.
Removing the tattoo might feel like denying part of who I am. Mitchell smiled for the first time during their conversation. That's exactly the answer I hoped to hear.
Marines talk about being forged in the crucible of training. But real warriors are forged in the crucible of life experience.
Your tattoo isn't a mark of shame, it's a battle scar. And battle scars remind us what we've survived.
He returned to his desk and opened her evaluation file.
You've passed all requirements for Navy SEAL qualification, Martinez.
Your technical scores are in the top 15%, your physical conditioning is excellent, and your psychological evaluation indicates you're ready for operational deployment. Sarah felt a surge of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her: pride, relief, disbelief, and a profound sense of achievement that went far beyond military qualification.
However, Mitchell continued, there's one additional consideration.
Your background and experiences make you particularly valuable for certain types of operations.
Would you be interested in specialized assignment after you complete advanced training? What kind of specialized assignment, sir? Human trafficking interdiction. Counter-trafficking operations. Missions that involve rescuing people from situations similar to what you experienced.
Your understanding of how those operations work, combined with your military training, would make you incredibly effective at that kind of work. Sarah felt something click into place, a sense of purpose that went beyond personal achievement or military career advancement. This was the opportunity to transform her worst experiences into a tool for protecting others, to ensure that other victims would have someone show up when they needed rescue.
Yes, sir. I'd be very interested in that assignment.
Mitchell signed her qualification papers with a flourish, then handed them to her.
Congratulations, Petty Officer Martinez.
You've earned the right to wear the Navy SEAL trident. More importantly, you've proven that you have the character and capability to live up to everything that symbol represents. As Sarah left Mitchell's office, she felt the weight of the qualification papers in her hand and the significance of the moment. She had transformed herself from victim to protector, from someone who needed rescue to someone capable of conducting rescues. The Black Viper tattoo would remain on her shoulder, but now it would serve as a reminder of how far she had traveled rather than where she had been trapped. That night, her team celebrated together on the beach where she had sat alone so many months earlier, questioning whether she belonged in the program. Elena, Morrison, Omar, Santos, and Sarah watched the waves crash against the shore while discussing their upcoming advanced training and eventual operational assignments.
So what's next for you?
Morrison asked as they shared a bottle of champagne smuggled from the base store.
Specialized operations, Sarah replied. Counter-trafficking missions. Turns out my background might actually be useful for something. Elena raised her glass.
To Sarah Martinez, who proved that warriors come from all kinds of backgrounds and that the best ones are forged in the hardest fires. As they toasted her achievement, Sarah realized that she had found something she had never expected to discover during her military service: a family of people who understood her value and accepted her completely, past and all. The black viper tattoo might remain forever, but it no longer defined her. She had become something new, something stronger, something capable of ensuring that others would never experience the helplessness she had known. The waves continued their eternal rhythm, but now they seemed to be washing away the last remnants of her old identity and preparing the shore for whatever missions lay ahead. Sarah Martinez, Navy SEAL, was ready to begin the work she had been preparing for her entire life, even before she knew that was what she was doing.